Hi, my name is Gwen Walker. She Series, I'm the current Vice President of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for the Musical Theater Educators Alliance. And I'd like to welcome you to our first of the year focus group series that was started by the person I'm going to introduce you to next, our immediate past president. I'm sorry, I'm busy letting people in the room. Our immediate past president and vice president of DEI at MTEA, Leo Yuning Chang. Hi, Leo.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So good to see you here. My name is Leo Yuning Chang. I'm currently a member of the DEI committee, and thank you, Gwen, for putting this together for such an important conversation. So today I'm coming to you from New York City, the land of Munsee and Lenape people. And originally I'm from Taiwan, which is a land to 16 indigenous tribes. And I would like to invite our friends who are here today to share with us where you're coming from, where you're zooming in from, and your land acknowledgement. And if you're not sure your land acknowledgement, or if this is a new idea to you, I just put a link in the chat over here. It is a great source to begin with. And land acknowledgement should not be just a statement. It can be and should be an action that deepens our connection within our community, to the history, and to our mother nature. And it also allows us to recognize our privileges and to appreciate the land that we are standing on currently. So thank you so much for having me, Gwen, and I'm gonna pass it back to you for a community agreement.
Gwen, you're muted.
Good morning. Sorry about that. So I'm going to just read our community agreements. One mic, one voice. Take space, make space. Recognize our own and others' privilege and how they affect the space. Speak from a space of personal responsibility. Use I statements. Acknowledge that intention does not equal impact. Be a learner, not a knower. Be curious. Individually, we know little, but collectively, we know a lot. Safer space, braver space. Listen to understand, not just respond. Be open to new ideas and approaches. Operate in good faith and speak in draft. So I would first like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for agreeing to come on a Saturday morning and talk about this super important topic with us. I'd like to introduce our fabulous panel. Max Chernin is a performer, he, him, understudy for Leo Frank and Parade on Broadway. Eliana Rubin, performer, she, they, education manager for DEI and belonging for the Jewish Education Project, and also has a BFA in acting from NYU. Becca Suskauer, performer, she, her, founder of the Jewish Theater Advocacy Coalition, and Jonah Schwartz, performer, he, him, current rising fourth year Penn State musical theater student about to graduate and take on the world. He's working this summer at the Kennedy Center as the social impact intern. So welcome. Thank you for being here. I appreciate and honor your contribution this morning. I know that you do not have to educate people, and I appreciate your willingness to do so. I'd like to kick off our discussion by asking you, what does being Jewish mean to you?
I'd be happy to start. Hi, everyone. My name is Becca. I think being Jewish can mean a lot of different things. For me, I think of the words tikkun olam, which in Hebrew means repairing the world. I just really like to live by this. Like, what can I do to help other people? What can I do to advocate for my fellow Jewish people and for other marginalized groups, to try and make the world that has constant problems a better place. And I feel like my best days lived are the ones where I'm kind of prioritizing that. Also, something that's very Jewish is asking questions. And I just like to come at things from a standpoint of curiosity. And that just feels very, very Jewish to me. So yeah, that's probably my answer.
I can jump in. Oh, sorry, Jonah. Go for it.
Oh, no, go ahead. I'll go next.
Okay. Hi, Eliana Rubin, Chide. When I think of what being Jewish means to me, I think of community. And I think about, I grew up in the Reform movement, and my mom is a cantor, so clergy member who does musical liturgy. And anytime that I stepped foot into the synagogue or into my youth programs, I was always met with such a warm and inviting community and this feeling of safety and security, and of compassion. Similarly to Becca, I also love asking questions, and I also like to challenge my own thought processes to see how I can continue to improve myself. There's this rabbinic sage from a long time ago named Ben Bagbag, who is quoted as saying, "Turn it and turn it, for everything is in it," referring to the Torah. But I think that there's also something inherently Jewish about turning the aspects of the way that we carry ourselves in the world and seeing how we can continue to grow as people.
I would
Thank
love
you.
to invite all the panelists to just leave yourself unmuted and be here with us fully. That would be terrific.
Yes, I will. That sounds like a great idea. Thank you for all of those thoughts. All those thoughts, Eliana. That's incredible. I retweet all of those. And part of what I think, how I feel, what makes me Jewish is this idea of tzedakah. I think what I used to learn when I was a little kid in Hebrew school was that being Jewish is an inherently activist idea. We're always asking questions. We're always asking how we can better the world. There's a couple other things I think of. I think when I was having my bar mitzvah, I was committed to this idea spoken on by this ancient rabbi, Hillel, which was, if not you, then who? And if not now, when? Which is sort of a saying that I've tried to live by in all of my activist endeavors. And then I also, and this is sort of a tattoo I want to get at some point, which is sort of like against what some Jews have preferred, but you know, modern Judaism. There's this saying, Hineni, which means here I am. A sense of Jewish pride and belonging to a community. And then one last thing is, there's never a moment where I feel more Jewish than when I'm bickering with someone else about what it means to be Jewish. There are 1,000,001 different ways to be Jewish, and I think that is the most Jewish thing that exists in our community right now, is that the way that I am Jewish is so different from the way that my family in North Carolina interacts with one another as Jewish, and it's a beautiful thing.
Cool. I think I'm last to go here. Max Chernin, he, him. I'm also in Brooklyn on Lenape land. When I think about my Jewishness, I can't help but think about how I was raised, and I was actually raised Unitarian Universalist, which is like a very hippy-dippy abstract view on religion as a whole. And so every week in Sunday school, we dissected each like popular religion. And I think looking at my Jewishness, and so in addition to that, I would go to temple with my Jewish grandparents. And I think a lot about, as said before, community, and I think about family, and I think about food, and I think about gathering together. And I think, and I also think a lot about storytelling, because especially with every holiday and every gathering, there's always a rich, amazing story behind why we're there and why we gathered and why we've always been gathering for thousands of years. And so I find myself connecting most with that. And then whenever I'm in a smaller group of folks, there's just this loving connection in the room behind anyone else who happens to identify as Jewish there as well. And I feel a duty to continue that storytelling and to continue to share those traditions with everyone, regardless of how they identify. I think, like, I love to make matzo ball soup and latkes for all of my friends and for anyone new who has never had it before, which continues to shock me sometimes, that I continue to meet people that haven't been a part of those traditions. And I think that's a big part of it, just sharing it with everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. We thought it was important to start with some joy this morning. It's a difficult topic. And I'm just going to say a few things about what's been going on, and then ask some questions and leave it in your capable hands. But with the rise of the right in Europe and the escalation of ethnic tensions in the Middle East and the increasing anonymity provided by social media platforms, anti-Semitism is again on the rise. And the Anti-Defamation League reports that anti-Semitic incidents in the United States in 2022 added up to a total of 3,697 incidents of assault, harassment, and vandalism. And this represents the largest number of incidents against Jews in the United States recorded by ADL since tracking began decades ago. We all know about incidents that have happened in our industry. And I'd like to kick off our discussion this morning with the following question. What do you think are the biggest struggles that Jewish performers face right now? And what can educators do to address them or alleviate them?
I can kick it off. I think there are a bunch of different struggles, and I'm sure, you know, there's going to be a lot of different ideas tossed around here. My personal focus, the struggle that I witnessed the most, not being in school and being out of school a couple of years now, is representation in our industry specifically. What that looks like, how nuanced of a conversation that is, and the lack of nuance in which people in and out of our group discuss that representation. To get like a little more specific, Jewish actors getting to tell our own stories on stage and screen, and being able to tell stories of Jewish life, not just Jewish death. I'm very conscious about casting. Now that I live in New York, I really take a look at when Jewish shows or Jewish roles that have Jewish-centered identities are being cast. Do those Jewish people get killed at the end? Do they live? And why is there more of a priority to cast us when we die than when we get to live? And I've noticed this pretty consistently across the board. If you look at the casting of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, the recent casting of Fanny Brice and the Funny Girl Tour, versus the Leo Frank and Lucille Frank in Parade on Broadway, which that representation is very important. And in addition, we should be able to get to tell stories of Jewish life. That's just kind of scratching the surface of the conversation, because there's a lot more to say on that. But in terms of how, as educators, the conversation can also start at school, is how can we make sure Jewish students feel heard when we want to talk about this complicated subject? How can we, like, this is, and again, I don't have all the answers, but how can we create a safe space that Jewish students are able to, and Jewish educators are able to discuss this without being gaslit by our peers? Because that is very, very common I'm sure Jonah can speak to this as a Jewish student that's still in a BFA program. I know I experienced it in certain ways, but it's definitely gotten worse as anti-Semitic hate crimes and just anti-Semitism in general has been rising over the past few years. I think the problem is that the conversations about representation really started a few years ago in 2020. And I don't think they ever grew to include Jewish people. So I think, we need to figure out and start having the conversation as to how can we integrate Jewish people into that conversation, or just listen. If we don't know how to do that, listen to us and make sure our voices are amplified and heard.
Yeah, I would agree on all of that. And I just want to say that I think what we're doing right now is a very important step in all of that, acknowledging that this is a specific group within marginalized communities. I'll speak to being a part of a show that I have felt really held within my Jewishness. I think the approach of how we crafted the show is an approach that I would love to see happen across the board in theater spaces, in any space. We had a sensitivity coordinator on our show who was able to help us unpack the themes within Parade in both as a whole and then within affinity groups. So on our lunch breaks, we had different groups that met with her. We had all of our young adults in the show. We have 17-year-olds in the show, and I felt that was so important for them to be held by someone outside of our creative team who could maybe just help them dissect the history that they hadn't possibly covered before. We had a Black affinity group within our show, which I think was important for all of them because Parade is the intersection of racism and anti-Semitism. And we had a white affinity group, which at first I was like, and then I realized we needed a space to unpack what it felt like to inflict harm upon a group of people in our show. And then we had a Jewish affinity group, which was really special and a really special time to connect with everyone who identified as Jewish in the show. And I learned that there were folks in our show that were Jewish or identified as Jewish. There's a woman who's married to a Jewish man who very much has taken in that culture and taken it all in. And learning about what an affinity to a specific group really means was so important. And I think that kind of space would be a wonderful addition to a higher ed space, to an educational space. Just saying, hey, we're going to have a group, anyone who identifies with this community, let's get together and just talk about how things are going. How is the school? And probably folding in some of the admin, some of the other folks in the school to sit there and listen. Again, just as Becca said, just listening, I think, is an important first step. But I think, as mentioned before, there are some really, really hard roadblocks here in terms of considering a Jewish group of people as a marginalized group. I think that's still a radical concept to some folks because they consider being Jewish the same thing as, I don't know, being just a small, when you a small part of someone's character or a small part of something. And I think when it hinges on Jewishness or hinges on big ideas of death or anti-Semitism, there's an inherent part of this storytelling that's important to come from a Jewish voice. That's kind of where I'm at.
I have to agree with everything Max just said, and just thank you for everything you just offered. Especially in that I feel as a student currently in a musical theater program, there is a general hesitance to have conversations in which Jewish people are regarded as an oppressed people, especially because one of the biggest issues is a lack of vocabulary when it comes to Jewish folks. Namely, in that a personal experience I had was that I was talking with a group of professors about Jewish representation in the media and the importance of Jewish representation on stage. And we came to an obstacle where most of the professors I was speaking to weren't aware that the Jewish community is an ethno-religious community. So a lot of the hesitance that I've encountered comes from, well, people aren't willing to consider a community of faith, a community that is oppressed, because they think that our Jewishness is a choice. A lot of people don't realize that Jews can't wake up and wipe themselves clean of their identities. We can't wake up and say that we're not Jewish. Our Jewishness is synonymous with our name. It is also synonymous with our genetics. It is synonymous with the air that we breathe. It is the color of my hair. It is everything I am. So like, it really becomes a challenge to talk about Jewish people as a historically othered people when other like faithful communities in our world, like there's a right now, I would say there's a stigma against communities of faith, which makes sense because communities of faith are responsible for a lot of harm historically. But because we're an ethno-religious community, we're not typically a community that I think should be, it's complicated. It's a very complicated conversation, but essentially, we are not seen as a community worth conversation because of this. And that leads to a lot of harm. An example of this in my personal experience in my BFA program was that, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of sharing of experiences during the Zoom call, but I think a good example would be, I was in a production of Brigadoon. And in this production of Brigadoon, there was this incredible concept for the costumes of the show. Brigadoon revolves around a magical village in Scotland that appears once every 100 years. And so we were thinking that because it's a magical village, we can have magical costumes, and these costumes can reflect the identities and cultures of the folks on stage. As we might know, a lot of Golden Age shows in the past and the original productions featured mostly white cast members. And this new production of Brigadoon that we staged at Penn State was a very diverse cast of characters and ensemble members. And so the concept was that the costumes would be able to reflect the identities of the folks on stage. Everyone was afforded a conversation about what they would allow on their costume and what they wanted to be featured on their costume. Different materials from different nations were imported. Different designs were featured on costumes to reflect the preferences of different cast members. But the two Jewish cast members in the show, myself and the person playing my father, were not afforded any type of conversation. Instead, I walked into a tech rehearsal one day and found that a golden Star of David had been sewn onto the shoulder of my wedding sash. I played the role of Charlie. And instead of being asked, what part of your Jewishness would you like to reflect within your costume, or would you like to at all, I was just told that an addition to my costume had been made, as well as to my father's costume. Can provide pictures, but they would probably be a little traumatizing. And it's a very pretty star, but it was very specifically placed right on my shoulder, akin to the type of badge which would be seen in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. So it was really shocking to me, but now looking back, it's not very surprising because our lack of vocabulary about Jewish people doesn't afford people the want to have conversations with us, because no one wants to talk about us, which is very sad, and which is why we're having the Zoom call today. But that's just one example of what comes out of a lack of vocabulary, and I hope situations like that won't exist in the future because of conversations we're having now.
I would just love to respond to that. First of all, I did not know, I actually did not know about this. Jonah and I are friends. And I just would like to say, I'm so sorry that you experienced that. I feel like that's a more overt experience of I don't know, microaggressive anti-Semitism. That, I mean, I didn't experience anything like that at school. I think it was more so comments for me from classmates who were just saying ignorant things. I think that experience, that situation is an example of the idea or the problems that we have with Jewish visibility. It's my belief that Jewish visibility and what it means to be Jewish or be visibly Jewish, or be like known, out as being Jewish. The idea of Jewish visibility seems to these days be in the hands of everyone who isn't Jewish. And that comes from, regardless of political affiliation, it comes from the right, it comes from the left. And people like to decide when we should be seen and when we shouldn't be seen, or when you can look Jewish or when you can't look Jewish, and that whole conversation, which is a whole mess to get into. I really think it's interesting that in this day and age, even though the stereotypes of Jews controlling the world, the media, Hollywood, Broadway are around and thriving, I think it's really interesting that we are the only people that don't get to tell the world who we are. Or we don't get to be believed and given the space to do that. I have been told by friends of mine, other women who look like me, that they could look just as Jewish as I do. So they should be able to go in for Jewish roles. And when I've not known how to respond, and I'll say like, well, not if I'm wearing my Star of David. And I've been told I can just hide that. Which is just, it blows my mind. It blows my mind. It's like, oh, okay, so Jonah has to walk into school and not be able to design his own costume like every other person of a marginalized group in that cast got to do. Why is that? And I think there's this idea that all Jews are white, which is not true, because you're discounting a very vast part of our community of Jews of color that like immediately get tossed to the wayside. And it also equates Jewishness to whiteness. I'm a white woman. I'm white because I'm white. I'm not white because I'm Jewish. And I think there's this idea, especially on the left, that Jewishness is ultra whiteness. We get racialized. People are confused about us because we've been oppressed as a race, a religion, and an ethnicity, which is, it's very specific when all those things have happened and can happen all at once. So on the far left, we have people equating us to ultra whiteness. And on the far right, we have people equating us to being a sub-race, to being like the opposite of white. And then there are Jews in the middle that are like dealing with those walls closing in on us. How do we still advocate for ourselves when it feels like no one understands us? Because at the end of the day, anti-Semitism doesn't have a party. It just kind of exists everywhere. And it's like this sneaky little serpent that morphs throughout time. And it's been around since the dawn of time. And it's crazy when the people you love and the people that are around you, the people you work with, can exhibit that behavior or can discount that it's happening in the first place. I'm sure Max can speak to this, but on the opening night of Parade, there was a protest of neo-Nazis outside the Broadway Theater. And then there are people months later when news of Fanny Bryson, Funny Girl, being cast as a non-Jewish woman who's about to travel the country and not be loudly Jewish to the corners of the world that need to hear it and see it the most. Then there are people who are immediately discounting our ask for simple representation amidst so much anti-Semitism. We just ask that we get to sometimes get to play our own roles, especially when those roles have Jewish-centered stories. And I know I'm rambling here, but to bring it back to Jewish visibility, I'd love to get to a point where we get to be the ones who speak about Jewish visibility first and be listened to first before anyone else about our own identity. I moderated a panel on Jewish identity in Broadway at BroadwayCon, actually just a week ago. We had some amazing Jewish actors on it: Brandon Uranowitz, Shoshana Bean, my sister Talia, Al Silber. It was a wonderful hour-long conversation, just tossing around ideas just about Jewish representation. And we all have nuanced ideas ourselves and nuanced perspectives. We disagree with each other. But I think the one thing that we could agree on was that role should have been cast as a Jewish woman. That is an ethnically Jewish woman who experienced anti-Semitism for being an ethnically Jewish woman and a visibly and culturally loud Jewish woman. She existed, she was real, and it's contributing to Jewish erasure and the erasure of Jewish visibility when we don't cast that character, that specific role that is going to be traveling the country, telling this Jewish story, when we don't cast that person as a Jewish person. That's why I'm very outspoken about Jewish representation. I'm helping start a coalition, the Jewish Theater Advocacy Coalition, so we can give Jewish people a safe space in theater and also talk about representation. And because people don't have the conversations, and oftentimes they're scared to. So I think just trying to have a fearlessness, asking questions to Jewish people if you're not Jewish before just sharing your opinion on whether or not you think it's important or what you think Jewishness is, because we're constantly misunderstood. And it would just be nice if we could have the conversation be listened to. I'm going to stop talking now because that was a lot.
I'd love to hear Eliana's response.
Yeah. Becca, that was really powerful. There's this assumption that Jewish people look like something, right? And that Jewish people are inherently seen as less than, perhaps because of the way that they look or the way that they act or the way that they pray. My brain is going to Barbra Streisand and how she was told to get a nose job and how she refused to get a nose job. And now she's Barbra Streisand and she still has her Jewish nose. But this idea that people are able to co-opt our history and our oppression in order to get another role on their resume is really problematic, because what it's doing is it is, one, just creating this culture of competition between performers. It is not allowing for conversations to be had about why maybe we shouldn't do this, and also what other choices we could be making. And when our educators are not facilitating these conversations with our students and perhaps with each other, it perpetuates this idea that if we ignore it, it's fine, because the Jewish population is so small that we can just overlook it. Additionally, when we center Jewish voices, it's this balancing act of ensuring that we're making sure that Jewish people are able to speak on their own behalf and speak about their own experiences, while also making sure that we're not putting them on a pedestal and assuming that they have all the answers about how to solve anti-Semitism. It is not a Jewish person's responsibility to do that. It is not the responsibility of any marginalized group to solve the issues that the dominant identities have created for them. the last thing that I'll say on this is considering intersectionality. I think that there is a struggle, like what Becca was saying, about assuming that all Jews are white. A large part of the work that I do is focusing on the marginalized groups within the larger Jewish population: Jews of color, LGBTQ plus Jews, Jews with disabilities, Jews in interfaith relationships. I'm thinking about what Max said about how there is a person who is in the Casta Parade who joined the Jewish affinity space because their partner is Jewish, and how learning about the Jewish culture, the Jewish history, the Jewish religion, because we might, or one might have close family members or friends who are Jewish, even though they might not be Jewish themselves, just allows for greater education and allows for more knowledge around what it means for the community to be Jewish, but also for one person to be Jewish, because like people have been saying, everyone experiences Judaism differently. So making sure that we're not lumping everyone together while also understanding the importance of the coalition.
Thank you all. Oh, no, Max, please.
I just want to chime in a little bit to the funny girl situation, because I feel like there's another element to it that I feel for Katerina, who was cast as this character, because as actors, sometimes we function out of this space of scarcity of work, and not being able to support ourselves. And I think this also goes back to what Jonah said with how gracious he is, acknowledging that all the folks that made those decisions are not equipped with the language. And like, it's disappointing that this communication chain from a breakdown by a casting director to an agent who submitted to a director and a whole creative team that then made this decision, and then a press team that spun this situation to point out that she's part of another marginalized group. That's the bigger issue, because Katerina, there's a woman in our show who has a relationship with a Jewish woman in our show who has a relationship with Katerina, who, when this all was happening, was just like, oh, this doesn't align. This energy doesn't align with her, because she's an artist, a considerate artist, you know what I mean? So I just want to acknowledge that, like, that is a bigger thing, and I am feeling for her in this situation, because there's been so much negative backlash towards her. And I think there is this world of scarcity that we function from sometimes that's like just really sad, and shouldn't be in our a situation like that should have been reviewed by all these people along the way, I think. Yeah, so sorry, just one more thing.
No, thank you for that. I think we could talk about that for the rest of the time, but I'm
sure
mindful that we have 20 minutes left, and
Yes,
I've asked
correct.
one question, and I would love to circle it back. So like, I am learning so much from you all and so grateful for your time. And I'm mindful of the fact that the people who will be watching this are musical theater educators and private studio owners, people who educate the future of musical theater. And what can we do to actively dismantle the tropes that are part of our canon, the anti-Semitic tropes that are part of our canon, and what can we do to ensure that the things that happen to you don't happen to future Jewish students in our program?
I can talk about it. Okay, so let's talk about, I just love examples, if you haven't figured that out already. Let's talk about the trope of witches on stage, just for like a quick example. So witches in storytelling, there are several examples in the theater where a character will be described as a witch. Obviously, we have Wicked. There's going to be an adaptation soon, or there already has been readings of Roald Dahl's The Witches, Into the Woods, several witches. I think it's important in the literature that we adapt onto our stages that we acknowledge the history of anti-Semitic tropes that is ingrained into certain characters. When it comes to characters like witches, we often see depictions of hook noses or big noses. They're associated with demonic evil practices. And this goes all the way back to the 14th century, when there was a witch craze in Eastern Europe, and Jewish women and Jewish people were being executed for witchcraft. And there's a long history of Jewish people being associated with the devil or demons, or having affiliation with non-Christian or pagan or heretic practices. Another affiliation of Jews and witches comes from the pointy hat that they would wear. I took some notes. I've done a lot of research on the topic, but in Hungary in 1431, after a council of the government, Jews were required to wear a cap, a long pointed cone-shaped hat that expressed to the community that they were Jewish, so that they could be actively physically othered, because again, there's actually not a physical way to be Jewish. Jews are a very diverse community. And so I think we have to be cognizant of the physical attributes that we assign to characters that have an anti-Semitic history. I think every time I see a production of Into the Woods and see the witch garnering a hook nose, it kind of makes me like cringe a little bit, because I just know the history behind that. And that's just one example of several characters in musical theater. We could talk about Fagin from Oliver, and how Charles Dickens refers to him more times in the original copy of Oliver as the Jew than his actual name, refers to his big nose, refers to his greedy nature, his luring of children to get him more money. There are several characters in the musical theater canon with anti-Semitic histories behind them. And I think the more in our table work we are able to study them and call them out, the more we are able to dismantle them. And I think it's really important that dramaturgy does a little bit of a deeper dive into the authors that we are giving these platforms to on stage. And Roald Dahl, I could talk for an hour about Roald Dahl that we don't have, but Roald Dahl was very anti-Semitic, and we love to interpret his pieces, his incredible literary works onto stage, Matilda, Willy Wonka, James and the Giant Peach. But I just think a little more attention to detail, in acknowledging the histories of the authors and the characters and the tropes that we're putting on our stages would be really helpful. I think there's a lot to be said about just saying what is there, not necessarily trying to go back in history and change the way they were written, but being present in today and saying, right now we are acknowledging that these characters were written with harm in them. They were written to inspire generations of harm. And so it's I find it important to just be more careful. Yeah.
I think that there's also something to say about, well, first, Jonah, yes. To build off of that, when we're approaching pieces that have a history on stage or on screen or in literature, there's also this culture around lineage and around if this show has been performed on stage multiple times and now we're bringing it back for a revival, and my grandfather really loved the show as it was, and he's so excited that it gets to come back. And I think, oh, well, actually, maybe we should rethink this. No, we can't rethink it. We have to put it just as it is on stage, because that's the way it was originally written. And my grandfather has this deep personal connection to the show. So we have to keep it as is. I think part of the conversation needs to involve dismantling, or perhaps recognizing that we can love something and still recognize that it is problematic or harmful to a certain community or communities. That doesn't mean that we have to completely disregard it. There are so many pieces of musical theater within the canon that have allowed for such beautiful shows to come about that speaks on the problems, but we also need to acknowledge where these things came from. And I think that it's really important for the educators to do this research on their own just as much as it is to look for resources as well. No one person has all of the answers, but when we collectively look into the past of these shows and of these pieces of work, and then we put our heads together and we think, okay, this works, this might not work because of our specific community and of our setting. This might work because of the people that are in the show, but we have to be cognizant of the audience that is coming to see it as well. We have to be thinking about all of these different pieces that are in play, and we have to be equitable with the work that we're doing so that we're not thinking of it as just this one big entity. We have to be very, very mindful. Educators have to be very, very mindful about who's doing the show, why we're doing the show, and why we're doing the show now.
Totally. I'll chime in. I worked in I was adjunct at Marymount Manhattan on the East Side this fall, and there is a fire in the next generation of young theater artists that is eager to dismantle the history of musical theater, which I'm like, yes. And if they are graduating with a degree in musical theater, there is a history that needs to be dissected and understood, because musical theater stands on a problematic ground to begin with as an art form. And I think an important thing that I tried to fold into, I was teaching a scene into song, a look at, classic scenes that went into songs. And my focus was 1940 something until 2000. And there's a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems in that material. And as we sat down and did our table work, which I wanted to make sure we did, I opened it up. That was a part of the conversation. What is problematic about this piece? What's problematic about the story? What's problematic about the writers? And that gave us a place to then go from there. And I think thinking about my college experience 15 years ago in a BFA program, it was when we were choosing scenes and songs, it was like, what's the thing that I can do that's like the most actory? Like, what can I dive into? And I think if we were to sit and really, really discuss those things in the class, those little moments add up. That's what it is. It's hearing your classmate talk about, oh, something that's problematic about this scene is its depiction of a Jewish person. And just those little conversations, I think, start to get the wheels turning for everyone in that room, because this next generation of theater artists, not everyone getting a degree in acting is going to go on and do it. There's someone there that's going to write, someone's going to produce, someone's going to direct. And those little seeds that happen in the classroom are what allow the conversations to grow, I think.
If I may, maybe, making sure that the Jewish students in your program understand where their support systems are.
Sure.
And also to say that I have seen people struggle in the role of forced educator year after year after year. I'm looking at a couple of them right now. And I don't think that we're doing the job in academia anyway, of making sure that we are inviting Jewish leaders into our spaces the way we are inviting leaders of color into our spaces. And not to say that a Jewish leader is not a leader of color, but to say that I don't think that is something that's being thought about or talked about. And it's something certainly I will be fighting for. And I thank you for teaching me today and something that maybe belongs at the heart of the conversation of repertoire selection and show selection. So I would love to ask you what you think about honoring the contributions of Jewish people in our industry, and in doing so, how can we actively combat the lingering anti-Semitic narrative of corrupt and nefarious Jewish control of the industry? How do we do that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to respond to that question, also just comment on what you said before. I think it's so important that Jewish identity and Jewish people get to be integrated into DEI in our programs. I was a member of our DEI board my senior year, which was during COVID times, super fun, early COVID times. And I was like, I felt like I was the only person on there that was like, you know, reminding people to include Jewish identity, and you know, I just continue to have empathy, and like kind of like Max was coming from a place of empathy just now describing the whole Funny Girl situation. I always just have empathy when people don't realize they're being ignorant or participating in anti-Semitic you know, practices that may not seem that way, or systems that have helped oppress Jews. What I think is really important is affording Jews the same empathy, because I feel like we're always supposed to be having empathy for people who are ignorant towards us. I'm constantly told that as someone who is also, I'm Katarina's friend, and I've been asked by other people in our friend group to have empathy, and I don't think any empathy was extended towards Jewish people in that situation. Similar to college programs, I think it's important to have empathy for your Jewish students, also Jewish educators who may not know how to go about this, because I feel like there's a lack of guidance for them. Something that's exciting about this coalition I'm helping start is this project that's near and dear to my heart, which is working with DEI programs and faculty in theater programs to be able to incorporate Jewish activism and Jewish identity into DEI programs, and maybe even having like training on sensitivity training, anti-Semitism, incorporating like the work that the company in Parade is doing into not just other shows, but also the programs where we're educating kids. Because those, in my opinion, it's college where you really learn who you are and what your beliefs are, and how to advocate for other people. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And I think before that happens, I think coming from a place of empathy, listening, amplification, all that stuff. And I think it's great. Like Gwen is my voice teacher, and she just has always been like, as someone who isn't Jewish, someone who has just always been a very good listener, always comes from a place of empathy and advocates for people who don't share the same identity as her. And I think that's a great place to start, because we can build on that. And yeah,
it's a great place to start, but also to admit in this forum my absolute ignorance about this, and any kind of discussion I ever had in my training or in my 20 years in academia, and my students coming along and educating me. I always learn more from y'all than you learn from me, but my students coming along, Jonah holds my feet to the fire on a weekly basis. And that, no, I'm so appreciative, but also I know that's not your job. And so I'm humbled and also excited to bring this work back to my colleagues. And I thank you. Eliana, I think you were about to talk and I interrupted.
Oh, you're good. I part of the work that I do is with this educational modality that I created called Jusicles, or Jewish musicals, which are short musical numbers based on our sacred texts. It's very silly, started at a Jewish creative arts summer camp. But when I do this work, I am very intentional about like, what Jewish story are we choosing to teach what educational aspect? When I was in grad school, my thesis was a curriculum guide to teach LGBTQ+ education to middle and high schoolers through Jusicles. And within that, there was a very explicit awareness that there were going to be students that were part of that community, students that didn't know much about that community, and students that were actively against that community. And in the letter to the educator that I wrote, I was very intentional about saying the only time that you should ever remove a student is if they are intentionally trying to harm the community. I think that we have to give space to people to ask questions. And I think that we have to give space to the Jewish community to speak up and say, this actually might not be the best thing because of X, Y, Z. And I think that that is a way to honor the Jewish people within the world of theater and to honor their contributions. A contribution could be as large as writing a musical, and it could also be as large as speaking up one time. Contributions do not have to change the face of the earth, but if we're able to change one person with our contributions, that changes the world.
If there's,
sorry, I'm so sorry.
okay.
Go ahead, Jonah.
I was gonna say, like, if there's enough time to talk about like Jewish appreciation in a BFA program, I would like to share a lovely experience that I had personally, a very Jewish pride moment. So there was a point in my education of my BFA where it was time to talk about Jews and musical theater history, and all that we had to say was, here is a documentary, A Fiddler on the Roof. It's an incredible documentary. I'm forgetting where it is. It might be on Amazon Prime, but it speaks with the new revival cast of Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway. But that was pretty much all that was said. And after that class in my musical theater history course, I said to myself, well, there has to be more. There has to be more. It can't just be this story about Jewish oppression. I mean, I identify so synonymously with Fiddler on the Roof. Fiddler on the Roof is the story of how my family got to America. When people ask me about my family, I typically say, well, people of musical theater likeness, I say that I come from Fiddler on the Roof, and then I come from Ragtime. I am Tata, I'm Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, and then I am Tata and Ragtime. And that is my family's journey from Europe to America and then to where they stand now. And I love that I can say that, but I did some research on Jewish composers, and I was thinking to myself, I recognize a lot of names of Jewish composers as Jewish: Schwartz, Sondheim, Hammerstein, Harnack, and the sheer list of Jewish composers that I was able to come up with just by a simple Google search. There's this one PDF that I clicked on that has like the tiniest little print, like the tiniest little Torah print, and like it takes like some zooming in to see the names because the list is so long. And I think there's this idea of Jewish corruption in the entertainment industry that we somehow took control, and that there are so many Jews at the helm from nefarious means of violence and manipulation, when the truth is that Jews are natural storytellers. We are in the business of storytelling. The ways in which Jews survive completely revolve around our ability to storytell and to pass our stories along to the future generations, to be able to speak about anti-Semitism and to be able to speak about our food, our joy, our history, our mishaps, our mistakes. And so I think reframing the conversation about why Jews have such a prominent place in the TV, film, and theater industry is really important. And understanding that they're there for a reason, and they're there because we love what we do. And it's really part of who we are. Storytelling is synonymous with who we are.
Before we end, I want to make sure that everyone sees Ann Kessler's message, which is just, it's really important just to also listen to Jewish educators, because they can be very far and few in between. Just like, I was the only Jewish person in my 12-person class at musical theater school. So I would read that before we get off the call. And thank you, Jonah, for everything you just said, echoing all of that.
I'll save that chat to be posted with the video so that people can see what was happening in real time. And I know we're at time, and I also know that this important conversation needs more space. And so if you all would join us again, I would love to have part 2 of this conversation in another month or two. If you would please join us again, I would greatly appreciate it. If you would like to leave us with a thought to close our focus group series today, and just thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am a little overwhelmed and very, very excited to share this with the world. You all are amazing. Thank you.
I'll chime in and I'll say, like, we are resources, especially some of the stuff that Becca is organizing and starting. Like, these panels and these moments are things that I think, like, please reach out to us, because I think I would love to just be visible for the students that are going through this. And this could be a part of the musical theater class. Like, hey, one day we're gonna have a panel of Jewish identifying theater artists come in and just help you unpack this moment and hear from us. So I just want to say, this is great work. And these are the kind of things that I think people can bring into their space. And don't worry about and don't think about like budget or money when that comes to mind, because I think, it's, I would love to donate my time to be I don't know, that it doesn't matter to me. You know what I mean? So I'll just say that.
Echoing the same. I can't speak for all Jewish people that are in theater, but many of us want to be resources. I certainly am. I have conversations about this literally every day. My Instagram is Becca Flower. Just DM me or whatever. Facebook me. I'm on there sometimes too. I love to have conversations about this, as long as people are coming from a place of wanting to learn and wanting to talk and have a conversation. It's just great to get the ball rolling, have the conversation, because that's how we start making change, and that's how we start implementing representation and advocacy for Jewish people in our community.
I second everything that's been said. You're never going to know if you don't ask. So feel free to ask questions to any and all of us. I think we are great resources in any of the questions you have, big to small, seriously, anything. I think we are more than happy to share the abundance of information that we contain as Jewish folks, and in the research we've done, and then the coalitions and foundations we're a part of. So please reach out. My Instagram is j.schwartzy. Ask anything you want. Love you all.
Yeah, literally the same. Feel free to reach out. Also get multiple perspectives, because every Jewish person has a different lived experience. And I would imagine that the way that I participate in Shabbat or the holidays is different than Jonah and Max and Becca, even though we might use similar texts, but perhaps different melodies to the songs. And also just thank you for being here. The fact that you want to learn more about this from the people that this is affecting means a lot. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Gwen and Leo, for putting this together.
Thank you all so very much. To be continued.
Thank you.